He claimed 17-year-old Aliyah was acting suspiciously, but viral cell phone footage would soon reveal a different reality, an elite athlete cornered by TSA Agent James Clayton, a screener prioritizing profiling over protocol. Clayton thought his uniform gave him the right to intimidate a quiet teenager. He didn't know the girl he publicly interrogated wasn't just an ordinary passenger. Agent Clayton thought he was enforcing authority. He had no idea that before Aliyah's flight even took off, he wouldn't just be facing a viral scandal. He would be answering directly to global Olympic officials demanding accountability. This is the story of the routine checkpoint stop that forced a federal agency to answer to the world stage. Aliyah Brooks was already awake at 4:47 a.m., sitting on the edge of her bed in the dark, lacing her training flats out of habit, even though she wasn't running today. Just traveling. Just a flight. She told herself that the way her coach had taught her to frame things, strip the weight off them before they could settle on your shoulders. She moved through the hotel room with the quiet efficiency of someone who had packed and unpacked 100 times before. Her compression socks rolled into her carry-on first, then the credential badge in its clear plastic sleeve, the one with the gold IOC watermark in the corner that her mother had laminated twice just to be safe. Boarding pass printed, not just on her phone. Coach Denise had been firm about that. Print it. Airports eat batteries and excuses equally. Aliyah zipped the bag and stood in front of the mirror for exactly 3 seconds. She wasn't checking her appearance, and she was checking her face, the one she wore in competition, the one that gave nothing away. Calm, settled, ready. She was 17 years old, and she was about to fly to the Olympic trials. The thought still didn't feel real, even now. Even after 2 years of Feb AM track sessions and ice baths and the kind of quiet sacrifice that doesn't make highlight reels, it lived somewhere between her ribs, not quite pride, not quite fear, something older than both. She had been running since she was 9, chasing her older brother down the block in worn-out sneakers, and somewhere between that cracked sidewalk and this hotel room, someone had looked at her stride and said, "That girl is different." She had spent every year since trying to prove them right. Coach Denise was waiting in the lobby with 2 coffees and the expression she wore when she was trying not to look nervous. She was a compact woman in her mid-40s with close-cropped hair and a voice that could carry across a stadium without a microphone. She handed Aliyah the coffee without a word, and they walked toward the shuttle together in the early morning dark. "How'd you sleep?" Denise asked. "Fine," Aliyah said. Denise gave her a sideways look. "That means 4 hours." "5. Denise sipped her coffee. "Your body knows what it's doing. You've done the work. Oh, today is just logistics." Aliyah nodded. She had heard versions of this speech before every major meet, the one designed to make the moment feel smaller than it was, so she could move through it without flinching. It usually worked. She let the words settle over her like a warm-up layer, something to wear until the real heat came. The airport was already alive when they arrived, humming with the particular energy of early morning travel, rolling suitcases, gate announcements, the smell of coffee and recycled air. Aliyah kept her hoodie zipped and her headphones around her neck, not in her ears. She liked to hear the world when she was moving through it. Silence was for the blocks, for the moment before the gun. Out here, she stayed present. They joined the security line, and Aliyah shifted her bag to her left shoulder, credential badge visible at the top of her carry-on. She had learned to keep it accessible, not out of arrogance, but practicality, and at 3 previous qualifying meets, the badge had answered questions before they were asked. It was her shorthand for, "I belong here. I have somewhere to be. I am exactly who I say I am." The line moved steadily. Aliyah watched the travelers ahead of her, a businessman in a rumpled blazer, a family with a stroller, 2 college students sharing earbuds. She catalogued them the way she catalogued competitors at the start line. Not with judgment, just awareness. And her coach always said the best athletes were the best observers. You had to know the field before you ran it. She pulled out her boarding pass and ID, tucked her bag onto the conveyor belt, and stepped toward the scanner. Her shoes, lightweight, high performance, the kind that looked unusual if you didn't know what they were, went into the bin. She moved through the body scanner without hesitation, arms raised, eyes forward. She was already thinking about the trials, about lane 4, which she'd been assigned, about the way the track surface at the venue ran slightly faster in the outer lanes, about the girl from Georgia who had beaten her by 0.03 of a second at regionals and would be in lane 6, about the way her coach had told her, "You don't race her, you race the clock." She was still thinking about the clock when she stepped out of the scanner and reached for her bag. That was when the agent stepped forward. He was broad-shouldered, mid-40s, yet with the particular stillness of someone who had decided something before he spoke. He didn't look at her boarding pass. He didn't look at the credential badge sitting right there in the open pocket of her carry-on. He looked at her, just her, and said, "Step aside, please. We need to do additional screening." Aliyah looked up. She kept her face exactly the way she'd practiced it in the mirror. Calm, settled, ready. But something in the air had shifted, and she felt it the way she felt a headwind, not with panic, but with the slow, certain knowledge that this was going to cost her something. The secondary screening area was a cordoned rectangle of grey carpet, separated from the main lane by a retractable belt and the invisible wall of everyone else's averted eyes. Aliyah stepped into it the way she stepped into a starting block, controlled, deliberate, giving nothing away. She set her bag down and straightened, waited. Agent James Clayton followed her in, with the unhurried confidence of a man who had never been questioned about his instincts. He was the kind of person who wore authority like a second uniform, shoulders back, jaw set, eyes that moved over you like a scanner that had already made up its mind. He snapped on a pair of blue latex gloves and gestured toward her bag. "Open it." Aliyah unzipped the carry-on and stepped back. Clayton reached in without ceremony, moving through her things with the efficiency of someone performing a task rather than conducting a search. Compression socks, a protein bar, her training journal. He held the journal up briefly, turned it over, set it down. Then his hand found the credential badge. He looked at it for a moment. Then he set it aside. Aliyah watched him set it aside and felt something tighten in her chest. Not fear, exactly. Recognition. "Where are you headed?" he asked, still not looking at her. "It's on the boarding pass," she said. Quiet. Even. He looked up then. "I'm asking you." "The Olympic trials," she said. "The credential badge is from the International Olympic Committee. My coach is right over. I'll need you to remove your shoes." She had already removed her shoes. They were in the bin on the conveyor belt, 6 feet away. She pointed to them. Clayton glanced over, then back at her, expression unchanged, as if the correction hadn't registered or hadn't mattered. "Why are you nervous?" he asked. "I'm not nervous." "You seem nervous." The fluorescent lights above the secondary area were slightly brighter than the rest of the terminal, the kind of brightness designed for examination. Aliyah was aware of it, the way she was aware of a stadium spotlight. It didn't blind her, but it marked her. made her visible in a way that felt less like recognition and more like exposure. "I have a flight," she said. "I'd like to make it. This won't take long if you cooperate." The word landed like a small stone. Cooperate. As if she had been doing something other than standing still, answering questions, keeping her hands visible, keeping her voice level. As if compliance needed to be named to become real. 12 feet away, a woman in a yellow cardigan had stopped moving. She was somewhere in her 30s, carry-on handle still extended, or watching with the careful stillness of someone deciding whether to intervene or document. She chose document. Her phone came up slowly, angled just enough to catch the secondary area without being obvious about it. The small red light blinked on. Clayton asked Aliyah to explain the shoes again, the ones in the bin, the ones she had already removed. She explained them. He asked why she was traveling alone. She told him her coach was in the main lane. He asked why her coach wasn't with her. She said she didn't know, that she had been pulled aside before her coach cleared the scanner. He asked if she had any other identification. She had her driver's license, her boarding pass, and an IOC-issued credential badge with her photograph, her name, her event classification, and a gold watermark that required a specific printing process to replicate. She laid all three on the grey shelf beside her open bag. Art Clayton looked at them the way someone looks at a menu they've already decided to ignore. "These shoes," he said again, nodding toward the bin. "They're unusual." "They're performance trainers," Aliyah said. "I'm a track athlete." They triggered the scanner. Lots of shoes trigger the scanner. His eyes moved to her face with a new quality. Not quite irritation, but the precursor to it. The look of a man recalibrating how much patience he was willing to extend. "I'm going to need you to watch your tone." Aliyah said nothing. She pressed her back teeth together and breathed through her nose the way Denise had taught her. 4 counts in, 4 counts out, and she stood there in the bright rectangle of the secondary area, while a federal agent told her to watch her tone for answering his questions in complete sentences. The woman in the yellow cardigan hadn't lowered her phone. 2 other travelers had stopped now. A teenager with a backpack, whilst an older man in a baseball cap who had turned fully around, arms crossed, watching. The terminal's ambient noise continued. Announcements, rolling wheels, distant laughter. But around the secondary area, a pocket of silence had formed, the kind that gathers when people sense that something is happening that shouldn't be. Clayton leaned forward slightly. "I'm going to ask you one more time. Is there anything in this bag you want to tell me about before I finish the search?" Aliyah looked at him. She looked at her credential badge on the shelf. She looked at the phone in the yellow cardigan woman's hand, the small red light still blinking, steady as a pulse. "No," she said. "There's nothing." But there was something, and it was already recording. The woman in the yellow cardigan posted the video at 6:14 a.m. She captioned it simply, "This is wrong. Airport security harassing a teenager with Olympic credentials. Someone needs to answer for this." She tagged the airport, the TSA's official account, and a sports journalist she followed who covered track and field. Then she boarded her flight to Denver and put her phone in airplane mode, not knowing that by the time she landed, the clip would have been viewed 400,000 times. Yet it spread the way only certain videos spread, not because it was loud, but because it was quiet. There was no shouting, no dramatic confrontation, no moment of obvious physical aggression to anchor outrage. What the clip showed was subtler, and for many people, more recognizable. A black teenager standing perfectly still while a man in a uniform asked her the same questions twice, held her credentials without reading them, and told her to watch her tone. 38 seconds. No music. Oh, no filter. No caption needed beyond the one already written. By 7 a.m. it had crossed platforms. By 8 a.m. it had a hashtag, #LetAliyahRun, that arrived organically, the way hashtags do when enough people reach for the same words at the same time. Track and field accounts shared it first, then sports media, then the broader current of general outrage that moves through social feeds like weather. Clips were clipped further, and screenshots were taken of the moment Clayton set the IOC badge aside without looking at it. That single frame, the badge on the shelf, Clayton's hand already moving past it, became the image that anchored the story. The comments split almost immediately, and the split was familiar. On one side, she had her credentials out. He didn't even look at them. This is exactly what profiling looks like. And she's 17, a child, going to the Olympic trials. What exactly was suspicious? And the way she just stood there, the composure. That's not calm, that's survival. On the other side, TSA agents have a job to do. You don't know what triggered the scanner. And she could have just cooperated. And why is everyone assuming the worst? Let the agency investigate. And inevitably, if she had nothing to hide, why does it matter? Aliyah herself was somewhere over the Midwest by then, headphones finally in, eyes closed, trying to do what Denise had told her to do on every flight before a major meet. Rest, reset, arrive ready. She didn't know about the video yet. She didn't know her name was trending. She didn't know that the 38 seconds captured on a stranger's phone had already traveled further than her flight. Coach Denise knew. She had seen it during the layover, hunched over her phone at a gate chair with the particular stillness of someone absorbing bad news in public. She watched it twice. Then she called Aliyah's mother. The National Track and Field Federation issued a statement at 9:47 a.m. It was 4 sentences long and had clearly been written by a committee. It expressed concern. It noted that Aliyah Brooks was a credentialed athlete in good standing, traveling under official Federation documentation. It said the Federation was monitoring the situation and would cooperate fully with any review. It did not say her name was cleared. It did not say the agent was wrong. It did not say anything that couldn't be walked back by noon if the narrative shifted. Athletes read it and called it what it was. A hedge, a placeholder. The kind of statement organizations issue when they want to appear responsive without committing to anything that costs them. Former Olympians were less measured. A retired sprinter with 2 gold medals and 3 million followers posted the clip with a single line. I have been this girl. Every black athlete has been this girl. The credential doesn't protect you. Nothing does. It was shared 80,000 times in an hour. Sports journalists who covered the trial circuit started making calls. Someone reached a source inside the airport who confirmed that the interaction had lasted nearly 11 minutes, significantly longer than the clip suggested. Someone else confirmed that Clayton had been the screening agent on duty and that a supervisor had been notified during the stop. The supervisor's name, Karen Mills, appeared in a tweet by early afternoon, attached to questions about why the screening had continued after credentials were presented. The TSA's Public Affairs Office released a 2-line statement acknowledging that they were aware of the video and that standard review procedures had been initiated. It was the bureaucratic equivalent of a closed door. By midday, the story had moved from sports media into general news. Our cable networks ran the clip between segments. A morning show host called it deeply troubling. A commentator on a political talk program called it a distraction from real security concerns. The airport's social media team stopped responding to comments around 11 a.m., and didn't resume until the following day. And somewhere in all of it, in the trending hashtag and the split comment sections and the Federation's careful 4 sentences and the retired sprinter's 80,000 shares, was a 17-year-old girl on a plane, eyes closed, still breathing through the pressure, not yet knowing that the world had already decided to have this argument with or without her, and the Aliyah found out at baggage claim. Denise had waited until they were off the plane, through the jetway, ere past the point where there was nowhere to go but forward. She pulled Aliyah aside near a row of plastic seats and handed her the phone without preamble. Aliyah watched the clip once. Then she watched it again, this time seeing herself from the outside. The stillness, the hands at her sides, the moment she pointed to her shoes already in the bin, and Clayton looked through her like she hadn't spoken. She handed the phone back. She didn't say anything for a long moment. "Oh, how many views?" she finally asked. "This morning it was 400,000, Denise said. "That was hours ago." Aliyah nodded slowly, the way she nodded when a race didn't go the way she'd planned. Not defeat, just recalibration. She picked up her bag. "We should get to the hotel." Her mother called before they reached the taxi line. Sandra Brooks was not a woman who panicked, but she was a woman who moved. And by the time Aliyah answered, and Sandra had already contacted 2 people, her sister's attorney and a civil rights lawyer named Marcus Webb, whose name she had written in the back of her address book 3 years ago, after watching a news segment and thinking quietly, "I hope I never need this number." She needed it now. They met in a hotel conference room that evening. Aliyah, Denise, Sandra, and Marcus Webb, who arrived in a charcoal suit with a leather portfolio and the calm, made unhurried manner of someone who had sat in many rooms like this one and understood that urgency and composure were not opposites. He was in his early 50s, with reading glasses he kept pushing up his nose and a habit of writing things down by hand, even when his laptop was open. He let Aliyah talk first. That was the first thing she noticed. He didn't summarize the situation for her or explain her own experience back to her. He just asked her to walk him through it, start to finish, and he listened with the kind of attention that felt less like legal strategy and more like respect. She told him about the scanner, the secondary area, the shoes, the badge Clayton had set aside. She told him about the tone comment. She told him it had lasted nearly 11 minutes and that a supervisor had appeared near the end but hadn't intervened, just observed. She told him she had stayed calm because she didn't know what else to do, because she had been taught that composure was protection, and that somewhere in the middle of it, she had started to wonder if that was true. Webb wrote steadily. When she finished, he looked up. "You did everything right," he said. "I want you to know that before we talk about anything else." Sandra exhaled across the table. Webb laid out the landscape plainly. The video established a public record. The IOC credential, visible in the clip, complicated the TSA's ability to frame the stop as routine. The 11-minute duration, if confirmed, would be significant. He wanted to file a formal complaint with the TSA's Civil Rights Division within 48 hours, request all available footage, security cameras, body cam if applicable, and put the agency on notice that documentation needed to be preserved. He was careful not to promise outcomes. He was precise about process. While they sat in that conference room, the TSA's Internal Affairs Office was doing its own version of the same conversation, except the tone was different and the goal was narrower. A supervisor 2 levels above Karen Mills had watched the clip on his personal phone during his lunch break and called the regional director before finishing his sandwich. By late afternoon, an internal review had been formally initiated, not because the agency believed wrongdoing had occurred, but because the video had made inaction impossible. What there was a difference, and everyone in the building understood it. Clayton had been asked to submit a written account of the stop. He did so in 3 paragraphs, using the flat, procedural language of someone who had written incident reports before and knew which words created cover. He noted that the scanner had flagged an anomaly. He noted that the subject had been uncooperative. He did not mention the credential badge. He did not mention the tone comment. He described the stop as lasting approximately 6 minutes. The TSA's communications team sent a draft of talking points to regional spokespeople at 4 p.m. The points emphasized protocol, thoroughness, and the agency's commitment to fair and consistent screening. They did not use Aliyah's name. They did not acknowledge the IOC credentials. They used the phrase standard secondary screening procedures 4 times in 2 pages. But a PR consultant, hired by the National Federation, sent a separate email to Federation leadership with a subject line that read, "Suggested messaging. Brooks situation." It recommended expressing support for Aliyah while avoiding language that could be construed as an accusation against a federal agency. It used the word nuanced twice. It recommended against any Federation official appearing on television before the end of the week. Back in the hotel conference room, Marcus Webb closed his portfolio and looked at Aliyah. "Get some rest," he said. "Train if it helps you. We're going to need you steady for what comes next." Aliyah looked at him. "I'm always steady," she said. He almost smiled. "I know," he said. "That's why we have a case." Split comment sections, and the Federation's careful 4 sentences, and the retired sprinter's 80,000 shares, was a 17-year-old girl on a plane, eyes closed, still breathing through the pressure, but not yet knowing that the world had already decided to have this argument with or without her. The call came on a Tuesday morning, and it did not come through the channels anyone had expected. It didn't go to the airport's public affairs office, or the TSA's regional director, or the Federation's communications team, all of whom had spent the better part of 48 hours carefully constructing walls of process and procedure between themselves and the story. It went directly to the Federation's Secretary General, as a man named Robert Hale, who had held the position for 11 years and prided himself on having seen everything. His assistant put the call through at 8:22 a.m. and told him it was the IOC's Athlete Services Division. Hale picked up the phone with the measured confidence of a man who expected a courtesy call. It was not a courtesy call. The IOC representative introduced herself as Dr. Lena Vasquez, Director of Athlete Welfare and Eligibility. Her English was precise and unhurried, and carrying the particular authority of someone who chose every word the way a surgeon chooses instruments. She expressed in formal terms the committee's awareness of the incident involving Aliyah Brooks. She noted that Aliyah was traveling on IOC, issued credentials at the time of the stop. She noted that those credentials existed specifically to facilitate the safe and unimpeded travel of credentialed athletes to sanctioned events. She then asked in the same measured tone what the Federation intended to do about the fact that those credentials had apparently been disregarded by a federal screening agent. Hale said the Federation was monitoring the situation. Dr. Vasquez said the IOC was past monitoring. There was a pause on the line that lasted perhaps 3 seconds and contained, in Hale's estimation, the weight of the entire Olympic apparatus. She told him the IOC was formally requesting a meeting with Federation leadership and airport authority representatives within 72 hours. She told him the committee had a responsibility to ensure that credentialed athletes could travel to sanctioned events without interference, and that any pattern of conduct suggesting otherwise would require the IOC to evaluate its relationship with the host federation and the facilities associated with sanctioned travel routes. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Hale called an emergency leadership meeting before he hung up the phone. By noon, the airport's executive director had received a written communication from the IOC's legal office. Not a letter, exactly, more of a formal inquiry, the kind that arrives on letterhead, heavy enough to feel like consequence. It requested documentation of the incident, confirmation of the screening agent's credentials and training record, and a written account of what steps had been taken since the video's circulation. It noted that the IOC took seriously any incident in which an athlete's official credentials were not honored, and that the committee reserved the right to flag the incident in its pre-trials venue assessment report. That last line moved through the airport's administrative offices like a current. A pre-trials venue assessment report was the kind of document that determined whether a facility remained on the approved list for future sanctioned events. It was, in the language of institutional consequence, the thing that mattered. The meeting was convened on Thursday in a glass-walled conference room at the Federation's regional headquarters. Around the table, Robert Hale and two Federation vice presidents, the airport's executive director and her legal counsel, a representative from the TSA's Civil Rights Office, and on a video screen at the head of the table, Dr. Lena Vasquez and a colleague from the IOC's legal division. Marcus Webb had requested observer status on Aliyah's behalf and been granted it, which meant he sat along the wall with a notepad and said nothing and missed nothing. Dr. Vasquez opened by stating the IOC's position without ambiguity. A credentialed athlete had been subjected to an extended public secondary screening despite presenting valid IOC documentation. The screening had been recorded and widely circulated. The conduct visible in the recording raised questions about whether the credentials had been recognized, honored, or deliberately set aside. The IOC was not in a position to sanction events at facilities where athlete credentials could not be relied upon to function as intended. The TSA representative said the review was ongoing. Dr. Vasquez said the IOC understood that and asked what interim assurances could be provided to credentialed athletes traveling through the facility in the meantime. The silence that followed was the kind that fills a room when no one has an answer, and everyone knows it. The airport's executive director spoke carefully. She said the facility took the matter seriously. She said additional briefings on credential recognition protocols would be conducted with screening staff. She said she personally regretted the experience Aliyah had been subjected to. It was the first time anyone in an official capacity had used the word regret. Webb wrote it down. The meeting lasted 2 hours and produced a joint statement, a timeline for the TSA's internal review findings, and a commitment from the Federation to provide Aliyah with a formal letter of support for her trial's eligibility, a document that had never been in question legally, but whose existence now mattered symbolically, institutionally, in the way that paper trails matter when the world is watching. Aliyah was at practice when the meeting ended. She was running repeat 400s in lane 4, headphones out, eyes forward, the way she always ran when something needed burning through. Denise stood at the finish line with a stopwatch and said nothing about the meeting until Aliyah's last rep was done. Then she said, "The IOC showed up." Aliyah bent forward, and hands on her knees, catching her breath. She stayed like that for a moment. Then she straightened. "Good," she said. "Now let's go again." The footage request went out on a Friday and came back in pieces over the following week. Marcus Webb had filed for all available recordings through the TSA's Civil Rights Office and a parallel request under the Freedom of Information Act, knowing the FOIA route would take months, but that the Civil Rights Channel, pressured now by the IOC's involvement, might move faster. It did. The airport's legal team, newly motivated by the prospect of appearing in a venue assessment report, so cooperated with a speed that suggested they understood which side of history they wanted to be on. What arrived first was the terminal's fixed security camera footage, 4 angles covering the main screening lane and the secondary area. Webb's team watched all of it in a single sitting, a paralegal named Deja taking timestamps, while Webb stood behind her with his arms crossed and his reading glasses pushed up into his hair. Whilst the footage confirmed what Aliyah had said and added details she hadn't known to mention. It showed the full 11 minutes and 14 seconds of the stop. It showed Clayton reaching into the carry-on and handling the IOC credential badge at the 2-minute mark, picking it up, turning it over, setting it aside, before asking Aliyah where she was headed. It showed Aliyah pointing to her shoes in the bin at the 4-minute mark, and Clayton continuing the search without retrieving them. And it showed Supervisor Karen Mills arriving at the 8-minute mark, standing at the edge of the secondary area for approximately 90 seconds, and then stepping back without intervening. It also showed something Webb hadn't anticipated. At the 6-minute mark, a second traveler, a white man in his 40s in a business suit, was flagged by the same scanner and directed to the same secondary area. The interaction lasted 1 minute and 40 seconds. His bag was opened, briefly examined, and returned. He was not asked where he was going. He was not asked about his shoes. He was not told to watch his tone. Deja circled the timestamp in red. Clayton's written report said the stop had lasted approximately 6 minutes. The footage said 11 minutes and 14 seconds. Clayton's report said the scanner had flagged an anomaly in the subject's carry-on. The footage showed the scanner light sequence, which Webb's aviation security consultant, a former TSA trainer named Harold Briggs, reviewed and identified as a standard shoe density flag, the same category of alert that had triggered the businessman's brief stop minutes later. Clayton's report did not mention the credential badge. The footage showed him holding it. Briggs submitted a 4-page technical analysis. He noted that the shoe density flag was one of the most common scanner alerts in high-traffic terminals, and that standard protocol called for a brief secondary examination, typically resolved within 2 to 3 minutes. He noted that 11 minutes was more than 4 times the average resolution time for that alert category. He noted that the credential badge, if recognized as IOC issued, should have expedited rather than extended the process, as he used the phrase deviation from standard protocol 6 times and no documented justification 3 times. The bodycam footage was more complicated. Clayton had been wearing a camera, but the recording showed a 40-second gap beginning at the 3-minute mark, the period during which, based on the fixed camera angle, he had been examining the credential badge. The gap was logged in the system as a device adjustment interruption, a category that existed in the TSA's recording protocol for moments when an agent physically repositioned the camera. Webb noted the gap. Briggs noted the gap. The TSA's Internal Affairs Office, in a separate memo that Webb obtained through the Civil Rights Channel, noted the gap and described it as under review. The witness statements came in through a different route. The woman in the yellow cardigan, her name was Patricia Osei, a pediatric nurse from Columbus, had been contacted by Webb's office after her original post identified her as the primary recorder. She agreed to provide a formal statement and did so over video call, composed and precise, describing what she had seen and why she had decided to record it. She said she had watched the businessman stop from the main lane and that the difference had been, in her words, not subtle. 2 other travelers submitted statements independently. Having seen the media coverage and contacted the Federation's public tip line, One was the teenager with the backpack. His name was Devon. He was 19, and he wrote 3 pages in a voice that was equal parts furious and careful, the way young people write when they know their words will be read by adults who are looking for reasons to discount them. The other was the older man in the baseball cap, a retired schoolteacher named Gerald Foss, who had stood with his arms crossed and watched the whole thing, and who wrote, simply and without embellishment, exactly what he had seen. Webb assembled everything into a single evidentiary file: footage, timestamps, Briggs's analysis, the 3 witness statements, Clayton's report with its inconsistencies flagged in the margins. He sent a copy to the TSA's Civil Rights Office, a copy to the IOC's Legal Division, and a copy to the Federation. Then he called Aliyah. "We have what we need," he said. She was quiet for a moment. Outside her hotel window, the city was doing what cities do in the early evening, settling into itself, lights coming on, the day releasing its grip. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now," Webb said, "we make them answer for it." The hearing was held on a Wednesday in a federal administrative building downtown, in a room that was trying very hard to look neutral and mostly succeeding. Long tables arranged in a rectangle, fluorescent lighting softer than the airport's, but carrying the same clinical quality. A raised platform at the front, where the administrative judge, a woman named Honorable Patricia Reeves, sat with 2 colleagues and a water pitcher that nobody touched. But IOC observers occupied a row of chairs along the left wall. Dr. Lena Vasquez and her legal colleague, both in dark suits, both with the stillness of people who had flown a long way and intended to make it count. Aliyah sat at the complainant's table with Marcus Webb on her left and her mother on her right. She wore a navy blazer over a white shirt, her credential badge clipped to the lapel. Not as provocation, Webb had said, but as fact. She had her hands flat on the table in front of her and her eyes forward, and if anyone in the room expected a frightened teenager, they were already miscalculating. Clayton sat at the respondent's table across the rectangle with 2 TSA legal representatives and the particular posture of a man who had been told to appear confident and was working at it. Karen Mills sat 1 seat removed from him, and her expression carefully composed into something that read as professional concern and gave nothing else away. Judge Reeves opened by establishing the scope of the proceeding. This was an administrative review, not a criminal trial, but its findings would carry formal weight and be entered into the public record. She noted the presence of IOC observers and acknowledged their interest in the matter. She said the hearing would proceed in 3 parts: complainant testimony and evidence, of respondent testimony and rebuttal, and expert witness examination. She said she expected everyone to conduct themselves accordingly. Webb went first. He walked the panel through the evidentiary file with the methodical patience of someone who understood that facts needed to be felt, not just stated. He played the terminal footage on a screen at the front of the room, the full 11 minutes and 14 seconds, unedited, with timestamps running in the corner. While he paused it at the 2-minute mark, when Clayton's hand lifted the IOC badge and set it aside. He let the image sit there for a moment before he said anything. "The credential was in his hand," Webb said. "He looked at it. He set it down, and then he asked my client where she was going." He played the businessman's stop next, the 1 minute and 40 seconds, side by side with Aliyah's 11. He didn't editorialize. That he let the comparison do what comparisons do when the numbers are that far apart. Harold Briggs testified for 40 minutes. He walked the panel through the shoe density flag protocol, the average resolution time, the documented deviation. He addressed the body cam gap directly, the 40 seconds of missing footage during the credential examination, and said, in the flat, technical language of an expert witness, or that he had reviewed hundreds of device adjustment interruptions in his career, and that they typically lasted 2 to 4 seconds. 40 seconds, he said, was not an adjustment. It was an absence. Clayton's legal team objected. Judge Reeves noted the objection and asked Briggs to continue. Patricia Osai testified by video, composed and clear. Devon's written statement was read into the record. Gerald Foss sat in the gallery and nodded once when his statement was read, as if confirming it to himself. Then it was Clayton's turn. His attorney walked him through a prepared account that hewed closely to the written report, the scanner flag, the standard secondary procedure, the subject's demeanor. He used the word protocol 11 times in 20 minutes. He said he had not noticed the credential badge was IOC issued. He said the stop had lasted, to the best of his recollection, approximately 6 minutes. Judge Reeves looked up from her notes. "Oh, the footage shows 11 minutes and 14 seconds, she said. "Are you disputing the footage?" Clayton said he was not disputing the footage. "Then how do you account for the discrepancy in your written report?" His attorney began to respond. Judge Reeves held up one hand without looking at him. Clayton said he may have underestimated the duration. Webb asked on cross whether Clayton had received training on IOC credential recognition. Clayton said he had received general credential training. Webb produced the TSA's own training manual, entered it into evidence, and read aloud the section on internationally issued athlete credentials, which included a photograph of an IOC badge and a note that such credentials should be treated as priority documentation. He asked Clayton if the badge he had examined matched the photograph in the manual. Clayton said he didn't recall the specific details of the badge. The room was very quiet. Dr. Vasquez, from her chair along the left wall, wrote something in her portfolio and did not look up. Webb asked one final question. He asked Clayton whether, in his professional judgment, the stop would have proceeded the same way if the traveler had been someone other than Aliyah Brooks. Clayton's attorney objected. Judge Reeves sustained it. But the question had already landed, and it sat in the room the way certain questions do, not needing an answer to do their work. Because the footage, the time stamps, the 1 minute and 40 seconds against the 11 minutes and 14, had already answered it. Aliyah kept her hands flat on the table and her eyes forward. She had stayed composed through all of it. But for the first time since the secondary area, she felt something loosen in her chest. Not relief, not yet, but the first suggestion of it. The slow, certain knowledge that the truth had been spoken aloud in a room where it had to be recorded. That was enough. For now, that was enough. Judge Reeves issued her findings on a Thursday, 3 weeks after the hearing closed. The document was 41 pages long and written in the careful, measured language of administrative law, precise without being punitive, factual without being cold. Webb read it twice before he called Aliyah, making sure he understood not just what it said, but what it meant, because those two things are not always the same in legal findings, and he had learned long ago that the gap between them was where disappointment lived. This time, the gap was small. The findings confirmed what the footage had shown. The stop had lasted 11 minutes and 14 seconds, significantly exceeding the documented average for the flagged alert category. But the credential badge had been examined and set aside without triggering the expedited review protocol mandated by the TSA's own training guidelines. The written incident report contained material inaccuracies regarding duration. The body cam gap remained unexplained and was flagged as a separate matter for internal affairs. The comparative analysis of the two stops, Aliyah's 11 minutes, the businessman's 1 minute and 40 seconds, was entered into the findings without editorial comment, because it didn't need any. Judge Reeves stopped short of using the word discrimination in the formal findings. Webb had expected that. Administrative law moved carefully around that word, preferring phrases like disparate treatment and failure to apply consistent protocol. But the findings said, in plain language, that Agent James Clayton had deviated from standard procedure in ways that were not justified by the scanner alert, and had failed to honor a priority credential in accordance with agency training, and had submitted an incident report that did not accurately reflect the documented timeline. The TSA issued its response the following Monday. Clayton was suspended without pay for 30 days, pending a formal performance review that would determine whether he returned to screening duties. The suspension was not a termination, and the statement made clear that the agency considered the matter an instance of procedural failure rather than intentional misconduct, a distinction that satisfied no one entirely and was probably designed not to. Karen Mills received a formal written reprimand for failing to intervene during the stop, a consequence that felt to many observers proportionally light for 90 seconds of watching and doing nothing. The policy revisions were more substantial. The TSA announced a mandatory update to its credential recognition training to be implemented across all major hub airports within 90 days. The update included a revised protocol for IOC and internationally issued athlete credentials, with a new requirement that any secondary screening involving such credentials be supervised by a shift manager from the outset. It announced a pilot program for independent review of secondary screening duration data at 6 airports, with the stated goal of identifying statistical outliers that might indicate inconsistent application of protocol. It announced that all screening staff would complete a 4-hour bias awareness training module before the end of the fiscal year. The announcements were met with a response that was, like most responses to institutional reform, divided and complicated. Civil rights organizations called the measures a starting point and insufficient. Several issued statements noting that a 30-day suspension and a training module did not address the structural conditions that made the stop possible in the first place. A coalition of black athletes released a joint letter arguing that the policy changes, while welcome, had only materialized because Aliyah happened to be carrying IOC credentials and happened to be recorded, and that the thousands of travelers without either form of protection deserved the same accountability. As the letter was signed by 43 athletes and read into the congressional record by a representative from Georgia who had been following the case since the clip first circulated. The op-eds came in waves. A former TSA administrator wrote in a national newspaper that the agency had acted responsibly and that the reforms demonstrated institutional integrity. While a law professor specializing in civil rights wrote in a different publication that institutional integrity was not demonstrated by responding to a viral video, but by preventing the conditions that created it. A sports columnist wrote that Aliyah Brooks had done more for athlete rights in 6 weeks than a decade of federation policy meetings. A conservative commentator wrote that the entire proceeding had been driven by social media pressure rather than legal merit, and that the TSA had capitulated to optics. The comments beneath that piece ran to 4,000 entries and were not, on balance, supportive of his position. Community forums were held in 3 cities, including Aliyah's hometown, where a church gymnasium filled beyond capacity on a Tuesday night with people who had been waiting for a room in which to say what they already knew. Parents spoke, young athletes spoke, a retired judge spoke, and a high school track coach stood at the microphone for 4 minutes and talked about the conversations he had with his athletes before every away meet. Not about race strategy, but about airports, about how to stand, what to say, what to keep visible, how to stay calm when calm felt like surrender. The room was very quiet while he spoke, the kind of quiet that means everyone is recognizing something. Aliyah did not attend the forums. She was training. She had read the findings. She had read the policy announcements. She had sat with Webb and her mother and gone through it all carefully, asking questions, understanding what had been won and what had been left on the table. She understood that 30 days was not justice and that a training module was not transformation. She understood that the reforms existed because of footage and IOC letterhead and a nurse in a yellow cardigan who had decided to press record. She understood all of it. And then she went back to the track because the trials were in 11 days and the work was not finished. The morning of the trials arrived the way important mornings always do. Quietly, without ceremony, the world not yet knowing what the day intended to become. Aliyah was up before the alarm. She sat on the edge of her bed in the dark and did what she always did, laced her training flats, breathed, checked her face in the mirror. Calm, settled, ready. But something was different this time, and she knew it before she could name it. And the weight she usually carried into competition, the compressed, solitary pressure of a dream held too tightly, had shifted. It was still there, but it was no longer hers alone. It had been witnessed. It had been argued over in federal hearings and church gymnasiums and comment sections and congressional records. It had been carried, in pieces, led by a nurse in a yellow cardigan and a retired school teacher and a 19-year-old named Devon and 43 athletes who had signed their names to a letter. The weight was the same, but the hands holding it were different. She ate breakfast with Denise in the hotel restaurant, the same meal she always ate before a race. Oatmeal, banana, black coffee she barely touched. Denise talked about the track surface, the weather forecast, the girl from Georgia in lane 6. She talked about the clock. She did not talk about anything else, because she understood, as good coaches do, that the morning of a race belonged entirely to the race. The warm-up area smelled like liniment and cut grass and the particular nervous energy of elite athletes who had spent their entire lives arriving at exactly this moment. Aliyah moved through her routine with the focused economy of someone who had done it 1,000 times. Dynamic stretches, strides, that's the 4-count breathing that Denise had taught her when she was 12, and that had become, over the years, less a technique and more a reflex. Around her, other athletes moved in their own orbits, each one sealed inside the private world of pre-race preparation. A few of them looked at her differently than they might have 6 weeks ago. Not with pity. She would not have tolerated pity, but with something closer to recognition. Now, 2 sprinters from separate programs found her during warm-ups and said nothing beyond a nod, the kind that means I see you in the language athletes speak when words feel insufficient. She nodded back. That was enough. She was in lane 4. She had always run well in lane 4. The call room was the last quiet place before the noise. 8 women, 8 pairs of spikes on a concrete floor, 8 different ways of going still before the storm. Aliyah sat with her hands on her knees and her eyes on the middle distance and thought about nothing and everything simultaneously, the way the first 40 meters needed to feel, the way her arms had to stay loose through the curve, the way the finish line would appear in her peripheral vision before she was ready for it, and she would have to trust her legs to know what her eyes hadn't processed yet. She thought about the secondary area, the fluorescent lights, the badge on the shelf. She let herself think about it for exactly 3 seconds, the way she let herself think about a bad race, not to dwell, but to acknowledge. It had happened. It was part of the story now, and she was still here. Then she let it go and walked out into the light. The stadium was loud in the way that stadiums are loud when something is about to happen that everyone has come to see. Aliyah moved to her blocks with the unhurried precision of someone who had earned the right to take her time. She settled into the set position, fingers behind the line, weight forward. The world narrowing to the lane in front of her and the sound she was waiting for. The gun fired. She ran. The first 40 meters were exactly what she had trained them to be. Explosive, controlled, the ground giving back everything she put into it. Through the curve she stayed patient, resisting the instinct to press too early, trusting the mechanics that 5 years of coaching had built into her body below the level of conscious thought. She was aware of the girl from Georgia in lane 6, aware of the field compressing and spreading around her, but only peripherally, the way you are aware of weather while you are moving through it. The final straight opened up, and she ran into it with everything she had left. She crossed the finish line and didn't know her placement for 4 full seconds. 4 seconds of pure, breathless suspension in which she was neither a complainant, nor a symbol, nor a trending hashtag, but simply a girl who had run as fast as she could and was waiting to find out if it was enough. It was enough. She finished second. The qualifying standard required a top 3. She was going to the Olympics. Denise reached her at the edge of the track and held her by both shoulders and said something that was lost in the noise of the stadium, but Aliyah could read it clearly enough. Her mother was somewhere in the stands, and she would find her in a moment, and there would be tears and the particular joy that arrives after a long time of not being sure joy was still coming. But first she stood at the edge of the track and looked up at the scoreboard where her name was posted. 2nd place, qualified. And she thought about the initiative she and Webb had been quietly building for the past 3 weeks. A program for young athletes. Know your credentials. Know your rights. But know that your voice is not a distraction from your performance. It is part of it. She had already chosen a name for it. She was going to call it Lane 4, because that was where she had always run well, and because the lane you're given is never the whole story. What matters is what you do when the gun fires and the ground is yours, and you decide finally to run like you were always meant to. Every year, our young athletes, many of them black and brown teenagers traveling alone to compete, navigate security checkpoints without credentials, powerful enough to force a hearing, without lawyers, without cameras that happened to be rolling. Most of their stories don't trend. Most of them don't get a room with IOC observers and a federal administrative judge. Most of them just miss their flights or their races, or saw something quieter and harder to measure, the belief that the system was ever designed to see them fairly. This story was written to hold that reality up to the light. If this story moved you, here's where to take it next. Share it. The conversation Aliyah's story started is one worth continuing. Pass it to a coach, a parent, a young athlete, or anyone who moves through airports and has ever been made to feel like a suspect. Learn your rights. As if you're a credentialed athlete at any level, know what your documentation entitles you to and what to do when it isn't honored. Organizations like the ACLU, the Athletes' Rights Movement, and your National Sports Federation are starting points. Support youth athlete advocacy. Programs that educate young athletes about their rights at travel checkpoints, in competition spaces, and in institutional settings need visibility and funding. Find one. Back one. Start one. If you're a writer, an educator, or coach, use this story. In classrooms, in team meetings, in conversations with young people who are learning that excellence doesn't exempt you from injustice, but it also doesn't have to silence you. Aliyah ran. She qualified. She built lane 4. The lane you're given is never the whole story. What matters is what you do when the gun fires.